This is an open public meeting. It's a meeting of the commission, and the single agenda item is to discuss the forum that we had today. We've never done this before. We don't know whether there's anything really to discuss or not, but we thought it would be fresh in our minds, and it was a good opportunity to seize the moment and see what came of it. I know some people have to leave, so we'll just play this as it lays. I wanted to throw out, for starters, one question to the commissioners. We've always had this sense that there is a tremendous need for support for the communities, even the large communities, but particularly the smaller communities. We talked this morning with a couple of city councilors from Springfield. They're a city, theoretically, they've got more resources, more access to experience and sophistication, but they've got tremendous questions. But our meeting today really reinforces that. The panel's conversations today really reinforces that. The one panelist who has had extensive experience as a host community, and for that matter, a surrounding community, practically warned us, to be sure that the cities and towns are properly outfitted. This is nothing pejorative about the casino industry. The casino industry are experts in doing in their interests what they do, which is fine. But she makes the point about a level playing field, and I think the point really was as pointed as it can be. So we've been wrestling with what kinds of resources can we provide, how can we do it. We're trying to move quickly on it. Commissioner Stebbins and I have had meetings, and we'll have more. But the negotiations are going on. Many towns are under pressure right now to be negotiating and to be beginning to lay out the outlines of the deals, which are the agreements that would eventually become the topic of a referendum. And I wonder, and this is just a question and not a rhetorical question, should we consider issuing some kind of a statement that speaks a little bit to the timeline? I mean, cities and towns don't have to be responding right now. I mean, there is pressure on all of us to get moving, but we don't know what the criteria. We're a long way from getting the second phase of an RFP out there yet, which is going to be what will actually get a proposal on the ground. And we know we will be getting ourselves organized to deliver services sometime pretty soon, or to support the community sometime pretty soon. But it will take us a while. We still are only 10 weeks into this, and we've got some work to do before we can figure out how to organize the resources for the community. So would it be constructive for us to put out some kind of a statement that kind of what am I trying to say? Empowers the municipalities that are affected here to realize they don't need to feel like they're getting the bum's rush. There is time, and that we will be providing resources in due time. And if they want to try to keep their powder dry a little bit, anyway, I don't have it articulated in my mind quite formulated completely, but I just wanted to throw out the idea. I have this tremendous sense of need at the community level, and I feel a compulsion to address it somehow, and I wonder if that's a way to do it.
I think we do. I think it'd be enormously helpful to do that to the extent that we can, to put out a broad timeline. A number of people from communities that I've talked to are concerned that all of a sudden the RFA is going to be out there, the request for applications is going to be out there, and they're going to have 30 days to respond, and they are going to be at sea. And I've tried to reassure them that that's clearly not going to happen. But I think something that talks in generic terms, general terms, as to what our timeline looks like would be enormously helpful. I think it would also be helpful if we developed and put up on the website and we've got the basis for it in documents we've created and in talks we're giving around the state, a process chart to show what the process is going to look like in general terms. I also think it'd be helpful if we began to capitalize on some of the expertise that exists in the regional planning groups and others to try to get some support mechanisms started in the various regions to help the cities and towns think through these things. So I think, yes, it would be helpful to put out a broad timeline, but also to do some of these other things that we've talked about doing. We've been talking about doing these for a while. But this, for me, crystallized the need to move forward on some of those other fronts as well.
Oh, yeah.
That's a better one.
Yeah, I agree with both the timeline and the statement, or the statement and the timeline, to inform communities of the process we're thinking about and talking about in a summarized way so that they don't have to necessarily go to our through our transcripts to figure out what we've talked about. But also I want to come back to the notion of technical assistance, which I hear loudly today relative to how overmatched or this playing field is not leveled. And I think there's a role for this commission. I know that in terms of addressing this imbalance, and I think we should discuss and just what could objectively be the tools that we could also communicate. I know that we brought this up earlier in a meeting or two 2 weeks ago, and I understand there's also the need to make sure that we're not interceding in the process that we will later be evaluating. So I'm really interested in figuring out a mechanism where that is also addressed, but we're providing help. And one takeaway from my perspective is that the regional planning agencies could be a real powerful tool, because it's already, first of all, they're the experts when it comes to bridging this gap between the region and the town, but also because they have already thought about the issues relative to mitigation that's going in their communities. Now, exactly how we make that happen, we need to start thinking about, because that does take time and money, but I think we should consider funding some of that.
Well, that's part of why this is going to take us a little while, because the funding mechanism, I think, is in the legislation that the proposers basically are committed to, but it's a circuitous process about how that money gets set up, and we may need to figure out a way to front it and just as a calculated risk that we're going to be able to get it back at some point. But that's part of the problem, because it's really about money. The resources are out there, and there are people who can deliver the resources, like the RPAs, but most of the RPAs are tremendously stretched too. They can't just drop everything and focus on this for 2 or 3 towns.
It's primarily about money, but I've talked to people who are looking for assistance in preparing an RFP to get assistance. I mean, for some people, it's not simply a question of money. It's a question of trying to find out how you approach from the very beginning this entirely new and different thing that nobody's ever had any experience with. And I sympathize with that. So I think that in addition to trying to figure out how to provide the money, we need to think about how to provide a gateway to expertise. And I'm not sure how we do that. The discussion we heard today about providing checklists, for example, is a different variant of the same theme. But it helps to take expertise that exists and tell people what they ought to be thinking about. So I think we have a role both in money provision and in doing some of these other things as well.
Yeah, I like the idea. I like the idea of the checklist also. I thought that made sense, because we can't be in a position where we're giving different advice to different folks. So, a checklist which really lays out all the issues, I thought made a lot of sense. I was telling the chair a little earlier about, because of some of the issues with local officials maybe not being on a level playing field in New Jersey, they started a state agency, the Casino Redevelopment Authority. that really did the negotiation on behalf of the surrounding communities in Atlantic City. So it's the whole casino district, not just Atlantic City. And they made decisions. The money was funneled there from the casinos into this agency, and they made decisions about which projects were funded. So it just, I'm not saying that would be the case here because it's not all in one city. The casinos are regional. But it just, because of some of those issues around the playing field, they really thought that was the way to go and decided project by project what they should do.
A couple of points that came out for me from the panel forum. First of all, this notion, which was clearly conveyed, and I don't think it's a surprise to any of the local officials here, about negotiating a host community agreement and not trying to get from the negotiation, making sure that what you need to mitigate is a lot of the costs and reimbursements from a developer that you're going after. Don't try to do everything, well, we want to solve this problem over here and we'll slide a little more money into the agreement request. Make sure that what you're asking for is really addressing some of your mitigation issues. Secondly, I look at this question of outside assistance and having them focus on two pieces. Helping them understand the scope and size of the project and what that is going to be on your local community. Water issues, sewer issues, things like that. I mean, the actual project costs. And I think there is some third-party resources that we can identify, and I would hope pretty quickly to help a community understand what the project mitigation needs are going to be. And then the second piece of it is mitigating everything else that comes under it. Impact on the local school system, impact on the fire department, the police department, and things like that. I mean, you have a small community that probably hasn't put out a fire in anything beyond a 3-story building is now looking at, a 15 or 20-story hotel that they need to understand how to, respond to an emergency there. I like the idea of a checklist. It's just, simply coming up with, a list of questions to get local community leaders to begin to think about as they think about the size and scope of the project. I mean, some basic information that we can put out to the communities in that respect, I think, is a helpful first step.
Sorry. One of the other thoughts that I thought was very insightful and relevant was this notion of an owner's agent. Or an owner's project manager. There's a nexus to the school building authority, and when construction reform passed, communities were then obligated to have an owner's project manager when doing a large construction project. So we could take that notion and explore it relative to the role of a third party that helps start asking those questions that need to be asked early on.
I know there are, and I think I still see Vera in the back room, right? Our panelist, and I know that there are some folks from Springfield here. I just wonder from anybody else who's from a community, is there, and there is a mic floating around somewhere, I think, would it be, in your views, are we misreading this concern that maybe communities are feeling too pressured? Would it be constructive, as we're talking about here, to send out some kind of a notification that does give a broad brush of a timeline, that does say that resources are coming, that does say it's okay to take a deep breath and you don't have to join all these issues yet if you're not ready? Are we imagining this, or is this, okay, Vera, go ahead, why don't you?
I'm certainly let the municipal officials, who are more locally dealing with this, answer that question as well. I see someone over there on the other side who might want to speak about this, but I do think that's important. I think the communities and the regional planning agencies, all of us would greatly benefit from that sense of perspective from you folks, and making sure that no one does feel like they need to do anything right away if they don't. I think that guidance document that frames the process going forward and what's happening would be very helpful. Certainly, I think from the communities, if that's something that you can put together so that they understand what is expected of them and from everyone else, in the conversation. I think I do get that sense, but I'm certainly happy to, Steve's here as well, and certainly he's dealing with this in his region as well, sure.
Yeah, Steve, it'd be great to hear your thoughts. Or you're from Pioneer, right? You've got it. So go ahead.
I think it would be
Sorry, I forgot your first name.
Tim.
Tim, sorry.
Tim Brennan. I think it would be enormously useful. The communities are, to some extent, scared. Even if they see this as a benefit, and many of them do, they're concerned of being swamped by the kinds of impacts that could come. So the more that could be laid out, plus the fact that you're going to try to level that playing field to the extent humanly and financially possible, I would see that as enormous value. The only caveat I put in is I would not use the fact that they have time to give a sense of sort of sit back and relax. I think the more that municipalities start to think about this now and not feel that they're being rushed, but the sooner the better. We've had the benefit of working with these municipalities for 2008 and on, but there are other communities that have not been engaged in any kind of conversation, so this is all new turf for them.
If I could add to that, and I think I touched on this in my remarks, I would think it's a very good idea for the commission to put out a timeline. It's the absence of information and the absence of a process that tends to polarize everyone, solidify positions, and as long as they feel there is a process they can participate in and they have a sense of the timing, I think there'll be much more constructive engagement than if there's nothing forthcoming from the commission and they do feel rushed, and they will tend to be a lot less constructive going forward.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brian Giovanoni from Middleborough. I'm a school committee member. And one of the things, having been dealing with this since 2007 in Middleborough, is that the timeline would be great, but you have to do a second timeline because there's a commercial aspect, and in Region C, there's an IGRA, or an Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, Native American casino. And in that case, where there's word that we may even have a compact coming out of the governor's office quickly, if that happens, all the mitigation is rushed already. And as we kept hearing about time, we don't want to slow things down, but we don't want to rush either, because the biggest thing we want to do is make sure we have a timeline for commercial and a timeline for the Native American one. And if you look at this and the suggestion is to maybe slow down the governor and maybe a change in the law is necessary and we get our legislators on board, maybe that is the recommendation from this committee here, this commission, that we really take the time to evaluate all those mitigations that need to be done prior to signing off on a compact with regards to a Native American side. Thank you.
I don't want to let this get out of hand. I know we have, there are representatives of some of the developers here, I know, and speaking for myself, and I would ask the other commissioners to speak up, either if they disagree or not. We're not talking about trying to figure out a way to slow this process down. If anything, in a way, I think we can speed this process up. If within the next matter of a very, very few weeks, we can make cities and towns feel like they have the resources available to them to really sit down and do this job and do it well, then we won't be going back and redoing this and redoing it. We won't have people that are angry. We won't have people that are insecure. We won't have people that feel they've been steamrollered. It will be a process which will be a better process and will be more lasting, and probably in the long run, probably even quicker. We're certainly not going to be talking to the governor about rewriting the legislation or anything like that, at least at this stage of the game. But I do think that there is a way to make the process effective, which puts the resources out there now that will also make it more expeditious, and that's what we're talking about. We're as anxious as anybody else is to get this to get these things up and running, and to get the economic development impacts and the revenue impacts rolling. But we want to do it right. A couple of other comments.
Just one thing to add in terms of the message going to the host community, to also be thinking about any surrounding communities, encouraging them to work together and to have some teamwork involved, that they can actually pool their resources as host and surrounding communities, to encourage that they don't work competitively, but they could actually work cooperatively, so that when the time comes that if their community is involved and their surrounding communities are involved in a licensing process, they're going to have to be all involved in the same licensing process and the same RFR together anyway. So if they start working cooperatively at this time, they could actually pool resources and maybe even save money too.
I think that's a terribly important point. The legislation talks about two ways to become a surrounding community. One, and this was touched on by the panel. One is by agreement between the developer and the surrounding community. If there's an agreement, the surrounding community is the surrounding community. If that doesn't happen, then after the request for application is responded to, then the commission can have a role in designating surrounding communities. But it would be to the advantage of everybody for the host community and the surrounding communities to work together, because the legislation also talks about a regional overlay, and that's one of the things that the commission has to ultimately consider, is the regional impact of the development, which is broader than just the host community or even the host community and the surrounding communities. So there's a real incentive to work together from the very get-go on this process and make it an inclusive one. Insofar as the Middleborough comment and the rush, it seems to me that we'll have to wait to see what the initial compact says, but it seems to me that there will be time logic would suggest there'd be time to deal with these things without everybody being in a complete tizzy once a compact is announced. I think a thoughtful process will occur there as well. That's at least what one hopes.
Right, and we do understand for the school committee members' point that there are two different issues here. There are the commercials in A and B, and there is the tribal in Region C, and we understand that there's a different process, but I certainly concur that there's every reason to think that although it'll be structured differently, there will be time to have these same kinds of community concerns addressed. I know that's certainly the wish of the governor and the legislature. Anything else if it relates directly to this issue of insights from the communities to, yeah, go ahead. Here's from Springfield up here in this front row.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the commission. I just wanted to thank the opportunity for having these public educational forums, because this within itself has helped my community very much to gain information and report back to the community as to what exactly is transpiring and how the legislation reads and some of the areas of concerns and question that have had. One thing in particular that would probably help the communities out, and it would definitely help Springfield out, and you alluded to it, is a flow chart and kind of like a roadmap of where these communities got to go and exactly how to start the process and where we start with different agencies, whether it be governmental agencies, whether it be nonprofits, whether it be quasi-governmental agencies. The flow chart would really add structure, and it would also take the politics out of the equation as well, which I think would be very helpful. And in Springfield, we had the opportunity to set up a casino site committee comprised of 15 members, some members of the Springfield City Council, Others are members of a community from a whole host of different neighborhoods in the community to have the voices and the concerns, and we're encouraging more public speak out. We're encouraging more transparency and an open process, and I think the flow chart would definitely help us out as a roadmap. And I thank you again for all the educational components that you've added, and it certainly has added a lot of transparency to this process, which I'm sure the public and the taxpayers enjoy that.
There's one in back. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Crosby. I'm a selectman from Berkeley, Massachusetts. It's near the casino that the Mashpees are talking about. And one thing I like that I heard from you just a few minutes ago, you want to get it right. I don't care what it says in the law. If there's something wrong in that law, if you find it wrong, I think you should come out and state the opinions of the commission that something in the law probably wasn't as good as it should be and try to get amendments in the law. One thing I really like for Commissioner Cameron that she said today is that we are on a level playing field. I've already found that out in Berkeley with the Mashpees. I know it's a different issue from the private casinos in surrounding towns, but there should be money up front to give to these towns, like the commissioner said they had in maybe New Jersey. If you don't have any money, you don't have any power. These casinos have all kinds of power. Berkeley's already spent money. We spent over $1,000 just trying to get a meeting with the Mashpees, and we haven't had a meeting yet. We've been trying to do this for a month and a half. So you can make a timeline for this whole thing, but if I was a surrounding city or town, and I'm not talking about what you've been talking about, the host community now, because you've gone into that a few times, but on the surrounding cities and towns, they should be on their toes right now. They should be looking right now, not wait for the 30 days or see something in your timeline that says, oh, you have till 2 months from now, because then they'll just have that, they'll be like we all do in our personal lives. As it gets closer, that's when you start doing something. When you were in college, you're probably like me, you probably didn't start studying till, the week before. You got to start doing it now because there isn't really a level playing field here. And the law, as good as you said the law was, and they've had these laws all over the country and all kinds of experience, I still think just looking at some of the things in that law, you can see some things just aren't quite right. They're just not good enough. Middleborough gave you something today about the whole planning procedure for tribal casinos and how it's backwards. You do a lot of the stuff after you already get the compact when you should have done things before you did the compact. Let's see, I think I have one other thing to say. The one thing I did like from the panel today that they said is what they found out in Connecticut is that about the mitigation for whether it's host communities or surrounding cities or town, they found it to be hopefully negligent. They found out that the host communities and the towns didn't get what they should have got from the beginning. So why don't we learn from our mistakes? And that's why I thought it was good when Chairman Crosby said, we want to do it right. Do it right. Don't just think that what's in that law that the State House came out with. I think if you find something wrong or you think that's not right in it, that you should contact the governor's office and express your opinions because you're the only ones protecting some of the cities and towns right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There were one or two more, and then I have one other quick question. I think this woman had her hand up, and then this woman, and then we'll call it a day.
I'm just an architect and planner from Munson, Massachusetts. And my question is that I haven't heard anybody at all discussing in this mitigation thing is the 2 nuclear evacuation zones in Massachusetts. These 2 men represent the 2 nuclear evacuation zones in Massachusetts. And one is, the Cape in southeast Massachusetts, and one is the whole entire Pioneer Valley. And if the Connecticut River becomes contaminated by Yankee Row, Somebody put up signs recently in South Amherst just to show the population where the evacuation zone goes to, and it goes to South Amherst, and who knows what other communities. Now, the ones that have been the casino proposals in Hampden County wouldn't be included in that. But what you have to say is, are these casinos going to be points of refuge in case of a nuclear emergency, or are they going to have to be evacuated and then cause a horrible problem?
Thank you. Good thought. One more.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ruth Jeffroy, Planning Director from Middleborough. Speaking from experience of preparing to negotiate with a casino developer and actually negotiating, the compacted time frame that you're under is immense. And I don't know whether the process for the commercial casinos will have any more extended time frame, but for a municipality, it's very, very tight. The types of things that you need to understand in your community, including the adequacy of water supply. First of all, understanding the demands on water supply, the demands on sewer capacity, the demands on public services, emergency response. A lot of times you don't have that information at hand, so that you have to gather all your departments together. They then have to hire their own consultants to evaluate your system versus what's being proposed. And that costs money. And you also have to have somebody quarterbacking that process. So having that ombudsman or somebody within the community is very important. But then you have to go through that process, gather all that, do those studies, gather that information very quickly. You need the legal expertise, and it's not just town council, it is outside legal representation. And we're talking over $100,000, I'd say, for any community, particularly a host community. And that's from what we went through.
Thank you. I know you all have a lot of experience in this. So that's really helpful. Thanks. I know we're going to lose Commissioner McEwen in just a few minutes. I wanted to just throw out one other thing. Should we start thinking about a staff person now who would be the coordinator of this stuff, not the person who would do it? I think we've decided that we're not going to do this in-house. But, you know, we've talked about sketching out a time frame, drafting MOU templates. You know, there's a whole lot of different, finding resources, making resources available, being somebody the communities can contact to say, I need X, Y, and Z. We could use, and we've also got this idea that Commissioner McHugh and I have been talking about possibly having a person on our staff who will help the developers find contacts at state agencies and expedite their process. It could be the same person, but should we make a sort of a presumption that we need a community ombudsman, a community mitigation ombudsman in effect, or a staff person to help us pull this together and implement this and then keep it rolling over the next years?
Yeah, I think so. We just received the memo on immediate hiring needs, and I think from Spectrum, which we will discuss tomorrow. But I was reading and thinking about it in that context, and I think it's very relevant to start thinking about the local, the mitigation, the coordination pieces, which are all very important.
And I think to pick up on that point, and there was another point made in the previous panel discussion about our Gaming Policy Advisory Committee. And as we know in the formulation, the organization of that, a couple of the seats are set aside specifically for a host community or for the license applicant. But I don't think there's anything that prohibits us from kind of tackling some of those same issues with either a working group or a task force. I mean, it's certainly a place where I would see the RPAs having an opportunity to interact with us on a regular basis to kind of identify a lot of these issues, because as we know, the organization of that policy advisory group, involves several entities within government recommending names and background checks. I think there's an informal task force that we should be able to organize and be mindful of these issues in the relationship with the host local communities as well.
That's a really good point. Such a person as we've just been talking about could staff the advisory commissions too, which they're going to need. And I think we have all, sort of tacitly assumed that because the advisory committee has people in it that can't be identified until after the licenses are awarded, or then we've sort of imagined that this was to follow. But I think the feedback we're getting is that's probably not the way we ought to pursue this. But that, again, will require some staff work to follow up on it.
I want to bring another point that's related. As I was listening to a lot of the discussion this morning, I remembered a couple of the meetings that we've had with groups, particularly in Western Mass recently, Chamber of Commerce or Tourism Bureau. And I remembered that they felt the need to let us know right up front where they stood in the casino debate. One of them was neutral, and they felt compelled to tell us. And I was thinking maybe in this spirit of neutrality, it is really resulting in activity. And whether they were eventually for or against, they just don't want to take a position. I couldn't help but wonder that planners should be engaged at the local level, whether they're for or against, because it's something that will have to be evaluated if there's somebody interested in or has purchased an option to a land in the town. I just want to relate it back to the point about this person. Maybe clearly there's a piece in coordinating and informing at that level, at the local level, that somebody could also help in that regard.
I look forward to discussing the issue of the staff person tomorrow in the context of this immediate hires thing that we're going to do. One of the things that I took away from today's discussion was how much at a higher level there is to think through at a policy level for us to think through. And at the moment, because we are where we are, each one of us is engaged in a whole host of minutiae, in addition to the policy kinds of things. And it seems to me that we need to solve that issue and get on with these higher level issues as well. At the same time, meeting the needs that we've heard are so urgent among the cities and towns. I think we can do both, and I think thinking about the whole staffing process tomorrow will be a start in that direction.
Yeah. Great. Commissioner McHugh is referring to our weekly public meeting that we have, open public meeting that we have every Tuesday afternoon at 1 o'clock, when we'll be talking more about staffing. So I take from this, I think we definitely have a consensus that we want to see if we can't put together some kind of a notification to prospective surrounding and host communities that have something about timeline, something about resources coming, and we will continue to think about the idea of a person and get moving on the advisory committee. I think all three of those are really important new thoughts. Any other feedback, conversation about today's meeting that we want to have before we call it a day? We'll call it a day. Thank you all very, very much for hanging with us.